What if I were to tell you that this project was retarded? Throughout history, words like retarded, fruitcake, and schizo have been used to describe negative things, and in the process, it's degraded and stigmatized those with mental illnesses. But as I saw today, many of you were visibly shocked at the fact that I would use the word retarded. So how do we get from a society that condemned mental illness and thought it was okay to use these words to the society that we have today that is open to discuss mental illness and cringes at the use of these words? The story of the changing perspectives of mental illness in America begins around the 1800s. In America, there have been vast improvements on positive perspectives of mental illness. In fact, mental health has undergone the process of becoming largely destigmatized. And this conveys the shift of American citizens' perspectives on mental illness from condemnation to active support. And we first see this with the advent of mental institutions starting in the 1790s through the 1881. Now, according to Donna R. Kemp in her book Mental Health in America, the first mental institutions in America were built by the US government. And they built these and adopted the design of Philippe Pinel, who was a Frenchman who designed mental institutions in France. They copied his design. And on top of that, we have Dorothea Dix, who led the movement to not only ensure that we build mental institutions, but that we make sure that those with mental illnesses are ending up in the mental institutions and not in the poorhouses or on the streets. Now, this was a very important shift because this is the first time that we see the US prioritize those with mental illnesses. However, sadly, because of the introduction of industrialization, most of our time, revenue, and energy and land went to building factories instead of building mental institutions. So we were left with the mental institutions that we had, and they quickly became overcrowded. And this overpopulation led to quick fixes, which are lobotomies and shock therapies. And because of this, most of the people that were in the mental institutions remained in the mental institutions. However, this did not last too long with the introduction of new science and medicine in the 1950s. And one example is the new research that showed these barbaric practices such as lobotomies and shock therapies were inherently detrimental to those with mental illnesses. Another example is the introduction of psychotropic medicines, which are medicines designed to alter your mood. These were not only extremely impactful for those with mental illnesses, but they sparked optimism in the community of American citizens. And they sparked this optimism because we now saw those with mental illnesses as being able to function in society. Therefore, our perspective on mental illness changed from something to be feared to something that can be managed. Our next shift is when President John F. Kennedy picked up right where the 1950s left off with his Community Mental Health Act. And this act was established in 1963, and it had 4 goals. The first one was to further integrate those with mental illnesses back into society. The second one was to ensure that psychotropic medicines could be affordable and attainable for the general public. The third one was to ensure that hospitals were not simply for housing, but for treatment and rehabilitation. And the fourth one was to establish community mental health centers that kicked off in 1975. Now, according to Mark Moran, a historian who wrote a commentary on the Community Mental Health Act, called this a landmark achievement because it revamped so many outdated practices that we had in the US government. Not only this, but this was the first time that we see the US government, specifically the federal government, take time to make a policy about mental health. Our last shift is movements in the media. So one of my favorite examples is A Beautiful Mind. And this movie was made in the 2000s, and it accurately portrays the life of Jonathan Forbes Nash, who was a brilliant mathematician who also happened to be schizophrenic. Now, this movie was so important because it showed to the US citizens that just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean you don't have anything to offer to society. In fact, Jonathan Nash thought of things that probably none of us could ever comprehend. My second example is peer programs that kicked off in the 2000s. Now, these programs were all about decreasing the ignorance of the community in America to show them what mental illness really is. And we see that these peer programs were extremely effective, with surveys done by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine showing that from 1996 to 2006, there was a decrease in the stigma that receiving treatment for mental health was a negative thing. We also see that more than 80% of adults from these surveys encouraged that treatment for mental health was not only effective, but they encouraged it. Finally, the last example of a social movement is the Spread the Word to End the R Word campaign. Now, this campaign kicked off in February of 2009, and it basically explained to the community why using words such as retarded is so degrading to those with mental illnesses. And we see how impactful this campaign was since a law, Rose's Law, was actually designed because of it. According to Tony Sugg in her commentary on Rose's Law, this law was all about ensuring that medical practitioners were prohibited from using any degrading language about mental illness in their everyday practice. Now, this law was signed under the Obama administration on October 6, 2010. From the beginning of America's history until today, there has been a significant shift on perspectives of mental illness that range from condemnation to active support. And this shift shows us how important it is, how we can use ignorance and decreasing ignorance to have perspective shifts in America. Now, there's still a lot of work to do on decreasing specific stigmas of certain mental illnesses. However, the shifts that we just saw today and the movements that we just saw today are a perfect model by how we can go about decreasing these stigmas. Thank you.